Hello, sixth graders. Thank you for coming back for part two of our videos on pictures of Fort Snelling. So in this building here is where the commander of the fort would have stayed. And the first commander was Colonel Josiah Snelling. That is who the fort is named out of. So that's what the inside or the outside of his house would look like. And then we can go inside. And inside they had, that day I was there, they had two reenactors pretending to be Josiah Snelling and his wife Abigail. So that's what the reenactors look like, and he was just sitting down to a meal. And then the next picture will have the watch and silver iron spurs believed to have belonged to Josiah Snelling. Those spurs are in the back of boots that they would use when riding a horse, kind of encourage horse to get going. And then a mourning ring worn by Abigail Snelling after her husband's death. If you look at the spelling of mourning, that means time of sadness after somebody died. And so we go to the next picture, we'll see those once it loads. So here are the two spurs that they believed would have been on the heels of his boots. And then up here in the corner is the ring that belonged to Abigail Adams. And again, a reminder, if you want to see the pictures longer, just go ahead and pause the video. So staying inside the house that belonged to the commander of the fort, this is some examples of the china or the fancy plates and bowls that they would have, and cups that they would have used to serve during meal times. This is inside one of the rooms in the building that the commander stayed at. Here you can see they're making a blanket, and a lot of the rooms will have fireplaces just for warmth. Up here is a clock. They have that plastic covering over it just to protect it, to keep people from touching it. And at the beginning was a lot of candlelight. This picture just shows another view of one of the rooms, and you see the old-fashioned chairs they had there, the type of hat, the rocking chairs. Nothing really too spectacular in this picture. Another room, this is if the commander had children. This could have been one of the bedrooms used by the children. And you can see the fireplace is just covered now so people don't put anything in it. Some examples of toys. This thing underneath here looks like a pot. That's called a chamber pot. And when you had to go to the bathroom, that's where you'd go. So imagine being the one that had the job to empty the chamber pot each morning or during the day. If they had to have meetings, the commander had to have meetings with his officers. This is a place where they could meet. So you see they have a table to do paperwork. And this could also be used at mealtime if need be. Going down to the basement of the commander's house, as you know, we get snow around here, so they did have toboggans that would be pulled, either most common pulled by dogs or maybe even horses, depending on the time of year. So here's a toboggan they might have used. And the cooking was done in the basement because they wanted to limit any rodents or anything like that up in the top part. So this is where the servants would prepare the meals. And just another part of the kitchen downstairs of the house. And just some examples of some of the different ingredients they would have used, spices and things. And here in this right here is where they'd grind spices down into a powder if they ever needed to. And this is where they did a lot of the cooking. So you can see a couple different stoves here. Here they might cook soup or anything they need to over the fire. And this is where they had storage for stuff. These barrels or kegs. They kept a lot of stuff. A lot of the meat might have been salted, kept in salt to dry it out for make it last longer because they didn't have refrigerators yet. Come winter, of course, it wasn't as big a problem. So this building here is where the carpenters would have worked, or anybody, blacksmith, or people that have to repair things. They would work here. The day I was there, I wasn't allowed to go into those buildings because they had a class for the people that are in the picture here. But that's where the carpenter and blacksmiths would have worked. And they had to have people repair shoes. So a lot of footwear they go through in the army because they're doing a lot of walking around. So this is where the person would do the shoe repair. And this is just looking down the back row of buildings. Up top in these ones here would have been a hospital, a library, and on the bottom here would have been various other rooms where they store things. Down here would be a room that belonged to a doctor that we'll talk about more in the future, so I don't want to say anything about that right now. So the quartermaster is the person that's responsible for making sure the garrison or the fort and the soldiers there have everything they need. So the material in this room and two others like it on the lower floors were the responsibility of the post quartermaster. They included uniforms, tools, building materials, hardware, and camp equipment such as tents and kettles. All of this material was produced for the Army and transported from the east by water. St. Louis, Missouri was the main Army supply center for the Western Post. Every shirt, axe, window pane, nail, and hoe was then brought up the river by keelboat. Ordering, transporting, storing, and keeping track of this mountain of supplies was the job of a lieutenant serving as quartermaster and a sergeant who assisted him. So the quartermaster was responsible for ordering this stuff, taking care of it, and then storing it, and then passing it out when they needed to. So this is what one of the basement levels look like. So everything the fort would need is stored here. And here's another one. You can see everything was stored in these kegs. It was just the easiest way to transport things back then. So the post did have a library, originally located in officers' quarters but moved to the hospital by 1835. The library at Fort Snelling was the first in what would become Minnesota. The post surgeon managed the library and loaned periodicals, books, and newspapers to the garrison. Post regulations in the 1820s stated that soldiers were allowed to borrow reading material for 31 days before being fined a late fee. Literacy rates among soldiers during the early 1800s are unknown. So that means how many people could and couldn't read. They really didn't know the difference, or they really didn't know how many people could read versus how many couldn't read. However, during times of economic distress, such as the 1820s, the Army received large influxes of skilled workers who would have been taught to read and write during their apprenticeships. Soldiers from New England had access to district schools as children, so units comprised of these men, as were at Fort Sumter in the 1820s, would likely have had higher literacy rates than units from other regions of the nation. So in Minnesota, you're probably going to see more soldiers that were able to read while stationed at Fort Snelling. And here is what their library looked like. So now we're going to the hospital part of the Fort Snelling. So any soldiers that were sick or wounded, this is where they would come to recuperate, to recover. And various tools and other instruments that would have been used by the doctors at the time or surgeons. And some other various tools, a close up of some of the tools, scissors and some of these other things. I don't know what a lot of them are, but this tool right here is for using, or for what they call bloodletting, where they'd make notches inside your elbow, behind your ear, back of your leg to drain blood, because they thought by draining blood that was one way they could make people better. But we know nowadays that that's not good. Some other tools they would have used, some of the bigger knives, and the saw up here is would have been used, sadly, for amputation. So if they had to cut people's limbs off or whatever, so they'd use that to cut through bone. So that's a bone saw. And they would have to have a part for if anybody died while on duty or at the fort, they'd have a place for them. And when you got to go, you got to go. And this is what one of the indoor toilets looked like at Fort Snelling. So the guardhouse. This building served as the base for the fort's guards. The guardhouse was the police and fire station for the fort, with the guards acting as first responders during an emergency. Therefore, guards were expected to remain awake for the entire 24-hour guard rotation. Guards were on post for 2 hours at a time, resting for 4 hours in between, often in a long rack along the back wall. Guards were rotated every morning during the guard mount ceremony. This building also housed the first jail in what would become Minnesota. There were 3 separate cells, a large common cell and 2 smaller black holes. used for solitary confinement. If you're put in solitary confinement, it means you're all by yourself, all alone for a long part of the day. So this is going into this is the guardhouse. So when the soldiers were getting their 4-hour rest break, this is a place where they could hang out. They weren't allowed to sleep because they had to be able to respond if something were to happen. And this is another spot where they could just kind of relax back here. And then back here through this door is going to the jail cells. And there was, so this is the door going into the jail cell. I'm not really sure why I took a close-up of that, but I did. And this is one of the solitary confinement cells they had. One here, and there would have been one back over here. And I'm taking this picture and standing inside the main jail room. But if you close that door, you can see pitch black. So that'd be a long time and a horrible way to spend most of your day. And then there would be times where people would come to the fort to sell things. And this is just, they'd list their prices here, and they'd be coming to sell things like this. So somebody might be coming to sell furs, because the furs trade was slowly coming to an end at the time the Fort Snelling was built. So some people might have brought furs there to trade, or other things you might see for sale are like mirrors, various types of knives, traps, all these kind of things are people would come to try to sell or trade to the soldiers of Fort Snelling. And then they'd have gardens there. They wanted fresh vegetables, so during the summertime they would raise gardens. And the schoolhouse. So they did have a schoolhouse there. The school at Fort Snelling was the first in Minnesota. Built sometime around 1824, Army regulations required a portion of the post fund, which is money for operating each military post, to support the education of soldiers' children living at forts. The few individuals we know of who conducted lessons at Fort Snelling during the 1820s and 1830s had been trained in the New England educational system, which is up over by New York, Massachusetts, that area up there. So it's likely that the fort school would have been furnished similar to schools on the East Coast. Though originally intended as a schoolhouse, the building also served as a warehouse, chapel, and billiard hall. So a place they can go play pool. And this is what part of the schoolhouse would have looked like. They would have had a fire. The children that went there, it was their responsibility to make sure that they brought wood. Every child had to take turn bringing wood. And if they forgot to bring wood on their assigned day, then their punishment was they had to sit the farthest away from the fire that day. So you don't bring wood, you don't get to take in the heat. And here is just another picture of what the inside would have looked like. You can see the teacher's desk, and the students would have sat on benches like that. So that is the end of this part 2 video. So if you have any questions about anything at Fort Snelling, please let me know. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.